What video or recording is perfectly innocent, but becomes terrifying when you look into the story behind it? My mom and I recently watched one of those 20/20 shows, and they were talking about a woman who went out drinking one night and was never seen again. She had gone back to one guy's apartment. The hotel footage showed her leave shortly after arriving, and the guy in the apartment swore he didn't do anything to her, but they kept interviewing this one guy, who was the last guy to see her alive. They stopped at a gas station, and he claims that she started talking to another guy, got in his car and left. He played the whole "if I had only known, I wouldn't have let her go" act, with tears and everything. Well, there's footage of him at his job a couple days later, and the footage is super generic. He has a cooler on a rolling cart, and he's putting it in a freezer. He worked for a food production company. When the police interviewed his boss, they asked to see all of her footage, and she obliged. When they got to that part of the footage, him putting the cooler in the freezer, she told police to stop. She said that those coolers were used to store granola bars, and there was zero reason for those bars to be put in the freezer. The girl's body was in there. He took it out back and burned basically everything in a barrel down the alley a couple days later, but it was before the police had seen the footage, and he had bleached his entire van before police could search it. The dating game. The concept appeared innocent enough. A woman chooses a bachelor out of the 3 available contestants and they go on a date. However, the game in 1978 turned dark when serial killer Rodney Alcala was nominated to be a contestant and actually won the game. The contestant refused to go out with him on the date because she thought he was actually creepy afterwards. She dodged a bullet. The song Anne-Marie sings in All Dogs Go to Heaven about wanting a loving home. While recording, the voice actress, Judith Barcy, kept crying. Her home life was awful. Her father was abusive to both her and her mother and would often threaten to kill or hurt them. Judith died before the movie came out. She and her mother were killed by her father and then he killed himself. She was 10. My dad couldn't watch that without crying with rage. As a kid it didn't make sense, because then he'd turn off the TV and just hug me till my ribs creaked. One day I saw a news report on a woman's body dropped in a lake. The police were still looking for the body. They interviewed a man who said that could have been someone's mother. A few hours later they find out the body was that man's mother. That's sad crap, man. There was a picture of a 16-17-year-old girl floating around very briefly years back. It was just an innocent picture of some teen posing for a photo. Look deeper into it and it turns out the girl was from a rich family and had a drug problem. She got into an argument with her dad, stormed out and stole his car, did a bunch of coke, then crashed into a bridge going hella fast. She was killed instantly. As sad as that is, the fricked up part is why the photo was being passed around. Somehow the photos taken as the scene of the crash found their way online and horrifically cruel people decided to send out fake memorial emails to this girl's family. Opening the email seemed innocent enough. A heartfelt subject about how terrible this was. A photo of this girl before she died. But scroll any further and there were the pictures of her corpse with messages taunting her loved ones. I found one of these messages and her body was not in one piece. It was mangled. Seeing your daughter's corpse is one thing. Seeing it in that state is something else. But to have people playing with it online for no other reason than to hurt you is unthinkable. Push girl, Nikki Katsaurus. I'm from Czech Republic and on YouTube, there's a video of a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire contender Victor Kalavoda. He's a pretty smart guy and performs better than well. However, later he's become one of the most famous mass murderers in the history of our country. The WWTBAM video always gives me goosebumps. The 2004 Tsunami videos. People having fun on gorgeous day, enjoying the now very wide beach not knowing the wave of death coming towards them. IDK about innocent, but if you cut out the ending, the video leading up to Bud Dwyer's suicide seems so normal. Just another guy on TV getting harassed by reporters over the latest controversy. If it had cut there, you could air it on the evening news and nobody would know someone died less than 20 seconds later. Just disturbing. For anyone daring enough to look it up, don't watch it if you have a weak stomach. So much blood. Tommy Cooper death on stage. People was thinking he was still acting when he collapsed on the ground dead for a heart attack. Tommy was a brilliant performer who was deliberately amateurish and had things go wrong as part of his routine, so when he died, many thought it was part of the show. Actress Melissa Benoist was on Jimmy Fallon in 2016. She told a story about a time she fell and tore up half her face and one of her eyes. She made jokes about it, and no one really thought about it. Last year she revealed that one of her exes was very violent when they were together. She revealed that the story she told on Jimmy Fallon was a cover-up story. The real story is that her husband, at the time, had thrown an iPhone in her face. It's so creepy knowing that said ex was almost definitely Blake Jenner, who she starred in Glee with. I can't bear to rewatch any of the season his character is in, creeps me out too much. That said, must have been heck for her too, what with Lea Michele also hating her. Maybe not that innocent to begin with, but extra creepy knowing the truth. A video of an African grey parrot named Bud saying "don't fricking shoot." He witnessed his owner, Martin Durham, being murdered by his wife. If I recall correctly, Bud also mimics both sides of verbal fights, alternating between a male and female voice. I believe the parrot testified in court. The wife was convicted. Next door neighbor security footage of a disturbingly calm Chris Watt loading up his work truck in the morning with the bodies of his recently strangled pregnant wife and 2 young children to dispose of them. Absolutely fricked up. In a recent interview he said the kids were still alive in that video and took their lives at the dump site. If I recall correctly, WWE did an in memoriam for Chris Benoit very soon after he died, a little too soon, before it was announced Benoit killed his wife and kid and then himself. Recent Britney Spears TikTok and all that videos she posted. I am not a fan myself tbh, but as a person who doesn't know much about her, it felt weird and somewhat awkward to watch it. Which I read the comments to see that there are people saying like how she's asking for help through all these videos. Bruh, she has no free will. Her dad has her heavily medicated and controls her life. Can't find video of it, but this happened in 2004. Guy named John Sharp lived in the suburb of Mornington in Victoria, Australia, with his wife Anna and 2-year-old daughter Gracie. One day Anna, who was 5 months pregnant with a boy, and Gracie suddenly vanished. John Sharp made a teary plea to his wife to come home, that she and Gracie were missed, and he loved them both so much, etc. A few days later police charge a man with the murders of Anna and Gracie. That man was John Sharp. John Sharp shot his wife in the head with a bow and arrow, killing her. He then shot his daughter. The first shot didn't kill 2-year-old Gracie, so he pulled the arrow out of her head and shot her again. He dismembered the bodies, bagged up the parts, and dumped them at the tip, basically landfill, if you will. He'd first buried the bodies in the backyard but dug them up after he became worried he'd be found out. He'd even gone so far as to send flowers to Anna's mother overseas, pretending she was still alive, when in actual fact she was buried in the backyard. He got 35 years, and from what I've heard, he's spent most of it in solitary, because literally every other prisoner has tried to kill him. The movie Blow Up is basically this but a movie. Spoilers. It's about a guy who takes a picture of a woman at a park, and that woman demands that picture. She follows him around. She seduces him, makes him think she loves him, then takes the picture and leaves. He kept a copy. He blows it up so big it takes up an entire wall, and then he finally sees what she was doing in those bushes. He goes to the bushes afterwards, and finds the dead body she was hiding when he took her picture. The video of the Boston Marathon bomber going to a supermarket to casually buy milk after blowing up 2 homemade bombs at the race. Frick him. Curb Your Enthusiasm were filming in Dodger Stadium during a live match. If they hadn't been there, a man called Juan Catalan would have gone to death row for murder. The cameras caught footage of him sitting in his seat and he was exonerated. There's a Netflix documentary on it called Long Shot. Imagine how many people were given the death sentence wrongfully who haven't been so lucky. How about the episode of The Cosby Show when he makes his secret BBQ sauce and everyone gets really groggy and tired and he tries fricking his wife? The 2007 movie Waitress, It's about a small town waitress with a passion for baking who struggles with an abusive husband and an unwanted pregnancy while trying to find happiness and love. It's a sweet and really heartwarming film, and it has some big name stars: Carrie Russell, Nathan Fillion, Andy Griffith, but most notably to this post, Adrienne Shelly. Adrienne Shelly was not only a co-star and the writer for Waitress, but this movie was also her directorial cinematic debut as a director. When released in 2007, it was very well received for its heart and unique directorial style. However, Adrienne Shelly was murdered in 2006, 3 months before it debuted. Her death was first ruled as a suicide by hanging before further investigation showed she was murdered by a stranger who staged her suicide. Waitress was the only film she would get to direct. The Adrienne Shelly Foundation now exists to support women filmmakers, continuing Shelly's legacy. Honestly, typing this up is making me a bit teary. Waitress is one of my all-time favorite movies, and a great musical as well, and losing someone like Adrienne Shelly just shows how cruel the world can be sometimes. Edit. Turns out Waitress wasn't her directorial debut, though it may have been her cinematic debut versus direct-to-video. And as a side note to this tragedy, Nick Cordero, who was in the Broadway version of Waitress, just died from COVID recently. Back in the 90s, there was a segment on the Jenny Jones show where a guy, Scott Amager, confessed that he had a crush on a male friend, Jonathan Schmitz. Schmitz was so embarrassed by the appearance that he shot and killed Amager 3 days after the taping. This case is covered in an episode of Trial by Media that's on Netflix. I highly recommend it. It's really interesting. Mother Love by Queen. Freddie got most of the song recorded, but Brian has the last verse. At the studio, Freddie said he was tired and would finish the rest some other time. He never did, resting at home during his final days. Brian came back later after Freddie's death and finished the last bit. I'd also add The Show Must Go On. It was recorded in one take, with Freddie being gravely ill at the time of recording. He simply downed some vodka and then began to record the only take. That kid who did anime reviews and ended up making a video about his big future plans. He ended up killing his entire family and tried shooting up his old high school before he got caught. Also, Elliot Rodgers' old videos are just eerie. Tears in Heaven. Eric Clapton. It's a song written to his 4-1-2-year-old son who died after falling 53 stories out an apartment window that was accidentally left open. The child's mother was Lori Del Santo, an Italian showgirl. At the time, her and Clapton were already divorced, and she was pregnant with her second child from another man. In 1999 she had a third child, Lauren, who killed himself in 2018. Her entire life has been nothing but tragedy. How about the kid crying while getting a hug from a cop? He's wearing a free hugs sign that his physically and mentally abusive mothers forced him to wear to a Michael Brown rally. Years later they drove off a cliff with their whole family in the minivan. They'd been abusing their adopted family for years prior. Not a recording, but a pretty terrifying picture that gets circle jerked all over the internet without the real story. There's a scene in Scarface where Tony et al. Are upstairs in an apartment while Manny is supposed to keep watch from his car. The now the leg scene. Manny gets distracted by a blonde girl in a bikini and starts hitting on her. Meanwhile, crap is getting crazy for Tony. It's a disturbing scene, but there's also an even more disturbing backstory behind something seemingly innocuous. The blonde girl, who was Tammy Lynn Leppard. Tammy Lynn was a Florida beauty queen and model who, near the time of shooting the movie, went to a party and didn't come back the same person. It's like she changed overnight. While shooting, she saw a blood packet get activated during filming and freaked out. She was released from the film and began showing major signs of paranoia. She claimed she saw something she shouldn't have, but wouldn't say what. Fearing some unknown person would kill her, she became almost a total shut-in and was suddenly argumentative, quick to anger. Then, one day, she went for a drive with a friend and never came home. The friend says they got into an argument and she got out of the car, multiple miles from her home, barefoot, and refused to get back in. Nobody has seen her since. That's a very brief retelling, but it is a crazy story, and I always think of that, bring it up to whoever I'm with when I'm flipping through the channels and see that movie on. Edit. Some of my facts may not be 100% on point. I was half high half asleep when I wrote this and did not expect this to get any traction, let alone 12k upvotes and an award. Thank you all. BTW. For the record, I too believe what some have posited, psychotic break due to taking bad drugs, but I've heard multiple other theories. Thing is, we'll likely never know what happened to the poor girl. It's incredibly sad and I think about this case often. Due to my love of film and fascination with the disappeared, I just so happened to catch Scarface on TV the other night and mentioned to my so that we just missed her scene. So it was on my mind when this topic came up. I bring it up every time the movie is discussed viewed, just because of how frighteningly intriguing it is. The last video of the guy who made Temple OS. It's a tragic story already, but a few hours after that he got run over by a train. I believe you're talking about Terry Davis. He suffered from schizophrenia and was an excellent coder. He killed himself by jumping on front of a train, if I'm correct. The family movie The Adventures of Milo and Otis. It's a live-action movie about a dog and a cat. The filmmakers abused the animals, even killed some in order to get their shot. Peanut butter jelly time. The guy was killed in a standoff with police and was Snoop Dogg's brother-in-law, who tried to de-escalate him during the incident. There is a photo of a girl and her mother on a plane. The plane they were on was Malaysia Airlines flight MH17. Flight 17 was later shot down by a missile over the Ukraine. There were no survivors. Another picture from Flight 17 was a boy and his mother just before takeoff. Another picture is of the plane before takeoff with the caption "If the plane disappears, this is what it looks like." The reason the guy said this was because 4 months earlier Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 vanished while going to China. I remember seeing that photo described last. I believe it was all over Twitter on that day. Any of the recordings of Jim Jones at his interracial church. If he had been hit by a car before he went to CA, he would have been looked up to as one of the early civil rights activists. It's crazy to me how someone who was calling for unity between people could end up as one of the most awful cult leaders in recent history. I remember reading that a lot of his cult members were middle-aged black people who were sick of the racism in US and he was offering some kind of utopian haven from that, but they ended up murdered. Genuinely heartbreaking. Look up the Hart family crash. One of the victims was a child who had been in a viral video photo for hugging a cop during a police brutality protest, and later was murdered by his parents after years of horrific abuse. The interaction looks a whole lot more like a child desperately in need of help rather than the feel-good moment it was made out to be at the time. I just heard about this on My Favorite Murder. I had no idea. And my heart breaks even more when I think about that haunted look on that kiddo's face in that picture, now knowing what happened. Not a video, but a picture from our serial killers about a guy killed by his girlfriend in the early morning. Prior to the murder, like minutes before she stabbed him, she took his photo of him in the bathtub. Sorry, bad English. Lemon stealing W. The Weird P intro got big a while ago because of its bad acting and overall comedic effect, but if I recall correctly the director got high on H and murdered the female lead some time after filming. I saw a low quality video that first showed a street from the view of a balcony, then the camera shook rapidly, then it ended showing a mirror. I found out about this before, but the video was footage from a live stream that a 13-year-old girl recorded of her committing suicide. The camera shaking was the phone falling from her hands as she jumped off of her balcony onto the street. The phone ended up in the room because it fell back into it. That part in Super Size Me where they're talking about how Jared Fogle is good with kids. LOL. My wife and I got our picture taken with Jared when he was doing a meet and greet at the Indianapolis Children's Museum. That picture did not age well. It was on an old episode of Oprah, way before I was born, but it was featured in the anniversary box set. This mom had made several recordings of essentially mom tutorials for her daughter, which is really sweet, but it was because she was diagnosed with cancer and she was expected to die when her daughter was 3. Her daughter said she watched them throughout her entire childhood and still plays them when she feels like she needs her mom around. This reminds me of an episode of Violet Evergarden that made me cry so hard. A terminally ill mother hires Violet to type up a long series of letters that will be sent to the daughter every year, from childhood up until she's old. I haven't actually moved past this episode because it was so gutting. I hate myself for spending 2 hours of my night scrolling through this thread. Now I can't sleep and I'm terrified of everything. Peter Pan. Quote from the book. The boys on the island vary, of course, in numbers, according as they get killed and so on, and when they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out, but at this time there were 6 of them, counting the twins as 2. As far as I remember, a theory was that Hook and his crew were children that escaped that fate, and explains the hostility and hatred towards Pan. In 2004, a woman named Rachel O'Reilly was brutally murdered in her home north of Dublin in the Republic of Ireland. A few days later, while the police were still investigating the murder, Rachel's husband and parents appeared on The Late Late Show, a national Friday night talk show, to discuss the horror they were facing. Rachel's father was a shell of a man who barely spoke a word. He was so crushed. It turned out later that the husband was the murderer and had executed an elaborate plan so that he could be with another woman he was having an affair with. He sat there, beside the devastated parents of the woman he viciously bludgeoned to death, and told a pack of lies to them and to the million or so people who watched that night, keeping a straight face throughout and acting like a loving widower. It retrospectively makes your blood run cold. Since pictures are being mentioned, there's the one of John Lennon signing one of his albums for a fan whom you can see in the background. Hours later, the fan murdered Lennon. Look up the case of Alyssa Turney. Her stepfather recorded her and her sister all the time. Alyssa would say things like, "Dad's a pervert and now she's gone." Police aren't really much help and Alyssa's sister now has to do all advocating herself. Very sad case. The song Go Outside by Cult sounds cheerful as frick until you realize it was written about the Jonestown massacre, where almost 1,000 men, women and children committed mass suicide. The music video even features members of the cult singing and looking cheerful. Fricked up that not long after that video was taken they all drank poison as commanded by the cult leader. It was mass suicide and mass murder. Infirm elderly and literal infants and small children were given the cyanide, and they certainly couldn't consciously commit suicide. Lisa Left Eye Lopez's death. There was a cameraman filming in the car the moment she crashed. I remember them showing it on MTV some years ago. I don't suppose this counts as innocent, but Billie Holiday singing Strange Fruit gives me the same feeling as a lot of the videos in this thread. A truly amazing voice, and such a horrifying song. Ferris Bueller's Day Off. When you find out Jeffrey Jones, who played high school principal at Rooney, was convicted of possession of child pornography in 2002. He was also in Beetlejuice. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.